make everybody be quiet. Hello. Happy midday. It's wonderful to see everyone here for one of my very favorite days of the year, when we have the Laird Essay Contest winner speaking, and we get to celebrate Ms. Betty Laird, who is one of the grand dame of Lawrence, who, it's like she owns this place. It's her theater. Betty's, I'll start with Betty's husband, even though he's kind of a minor player now. Anyway, Roy D. Laird was not a minor player. He was one of the founding parents of Crease back in 1959 and 1960, over 50 years ago now. And he was a professor in political science. But the secret weapon, of course, was Betty, who wrote lots of books with him, and has, in fact, I found one just the other day that has Roy and Betty Laird. I'll show it to you. It's some kind of a, feels like it's a glossary of some sort. Anyway.
Oh, yeah, I know.
But, okay. What is it?
I can't remember the name of it.
It was a long time, and as Russians say, it wasn't true anyway. But, okay, anyway, but this was true. So she's also a Kansas historian in her own right. She's constantly writing, she's constantly working on something. She's a poet, and if you are a loyal reader of the Lawrence Journal World, you will find her poems regularly published there. I look for them.
They'll publish anything.
No, wait a minute. Okay. That's actually not true, but she's also an actor on stage and screen, and so she's been in many plays and films around here. I think the one that we would always all know is Ethel Theron on Golden Pond, which was also famous as a movie. And Betty writes plays. So last August 2011, she had her very own play, To Catch a Butterfly, that was presented here in the Lawrence, not Lawrence Community Theater, I was about to say.
Theater Lawrence now.
Theater Lawrence, which is now moving west.
Yes, yes.
Yes, very exciting, I guess, not for those of us who love downtown,
No.
but anyway, closer to your house.
Yes.
Anyway, this was all in relation to our 150th celebration of, or commemoration, I should say, of the Civil War, not something to celebrate particularly. But Betty probably knows more about Lawrence history, Kansas history, and Civil War than anybody else in this room.
No.
But anyway. Okay, and I thank Betty every year, and it's such a pleasure from the bottom of whatever heart I have down here, for your support year after year after year of this great essay contest. And so, now we'll go on to the essay contest, which is basically an entry of sort of an 8-page thought piece. It's not supposed to be some really deep research, it's supposed to involve research, but it's supposed to be an essay of current interest. And it can be anything in the Reese region. It can be humanities, social sciences, and so forth. We've had both in the past. And thanks to Betty Laird's generosity, it is one of the best essays contests on campus. It comes with a $750 check, $75 worth of books, a certificate, and your name emblazoned on a deathless plaque. And you get to write it on your, it's like maybe the first, actually for you it's not the first bit of money you've won, but it's a large award and it's something that goes right on your vita, right? Okay, our 18th Laird Essay Contest. Boy, it's 20th year, we're gonna have a bigger party, right? Invite everybody to lunch or something over this. Roshi Du is an MA, Reese MA student who's just finishing up now. Graduating next week. We'll be celebrating her again. She's written extensively on Russia, China, and Central Asian energy politics and policy. Since January 2011, Roshi's been working as a graduate research assistant over at Fort Leavenworth with the PHMSA something I'm very proud of, the FIMSO CREASE Research Assistantship Program. She's conducted English, Russian, and Chinese research on multiple subjects in the region, and she's developed her own research project on Russian-Chinese competition over Central Asian energy resources. And she maintains a blog having over at Fort Leavenworth having to do with those security issues. Before coming to the United States in 2010, the fall, she got her Bachelor of Arts in Russian Language and Literature and Bachelor of Economics at Peking University in Beijing. And then she's going on to PhD work at Iowa. Do I dare say it? Yes, in political science, international relations, and with focus on Chinese-Russian politics. She's going to be hot for many years to come, I can tell you. So Roshi today is talking about a somewhat different subject, but one that has a certain sort of edge to it, shall we say. Anti-Chinese sentiment in Russia, threats of Chinese invasion, or fears of Russian xenophobia, which was judged to be the best essay of 5 entries. The committee praised her choice of a well-defined topic, interesting primary resource, which was a set of blogs. And the committee was very impressed with Roshi's reliance upon sources in Russian, particularly impressive. So, I'm now going to introduce to you Roshi. After the talk, please stay for a brief presentation. We'll present the various pieces of paper and plaques and things. And now, Roshi, please.
Thank you. Thank you for the introduction, and thank you very much for coming at the end of the semester. So I hope this presentation will be interesting to you. So my topic is anti-Chinese sentiment in Russia. So try Googling the keywords, the Russian Far East and China, or Dальний Восток and Китай, and you will find all kinds of disturbing titles like you can see here. These are all on the first page of the Google results. So indeed, Russia has all kinds of reasons to be seriously concerned with the increasing Chinese migration into Siberia and into the Russian Far East, not least because of Russia's demographic crisis. So let's do a quick comparison. So on the left, we can see the map of the Russian Far East. On the right, this is a map of the three northeastern provinces of China. And so let's do a demographic comparison and a geographic comparison.
It's a little bit louder.
Talk louder.
Okay. So the Russian Far East is home to 6 million people, and you can see its area there. And so how about the Chinese three northeastern provinces? It's home to 130 million people. And you can see the comparison between the areas is also, the difference is big. And according to a 2009 report, each year there are over 100,000 new foreign migrants into the Russian Far East, among which over 90% are Chinese migrant workers. In addition, the fear of Chinese taking the Russian Far East arises from some historical border disputes between Russia and China. So this is a treaty signed in 1689, Treaty of Nerchinsk. So this is the first documented border treaty between the Russian Empire and the Chinese Empire. However, after about 200 years, there were another 2 treaties, the Treaty of Aiguay and the Convention of Peking. And these 2 treaties basically reversed the border defined in the previous treaty. And the China, you can see, originally the border was like this, right? The Sakhalin, it was part of China at that time. And after these 2 treaties, China first lost this part territory and then lost this part territory to the Russian Empire. So in China, the first treaty has always been taught to us as an equal treaty between Russia and China, and the following two treaties are taught as unequal treaties. So, still, this fact and data alone do not give sufficient credit to the disturbing wording of the news titles from both Russian and international media cited earlier. So what I did is that I want to find out the average Russian people's views and expressions in regard to the problem of Chinese migrants in the Russian Far East. And I looked at relevant online discourses. So the sources for my analysis come primarily from Life Journal, one of the most popular social networks in Russia where internet users can keep blogs, journals, or diaries. And at the center of my discussion is a Life Journal community named Community Against Chinese Expansion. I believe you all know this poster, but this is not what you will see on the website of the community, right? So let's take a look at it. So this is a community created in 2006, and it currently consists of 73 members. On its introduction page, as you can read, it says, it explains the reason for which it was created as follows. Every day, hundreds of illegal Chinese immigrants moved to Russia, most of which settled in Siberia and Far East. And soon our country will have a large Chinatown covering the territories from the Pacific Ocean to the Ural Mountains, which will not be prevented by the laws established by the Russian Federation. And we must fight against it, otherwise it will be too late. And and we have both seen this parody of the poster. So this community, it has posted 124 journal entries over the past 5 years. The first blog post talks about how a Russian customer got beaten up by several Chinese merchants at a local market. And this story ends with 2 outrageous sentences in capital letters. You do not believe in the Chinese expansion, then soon they will come to you. And the most recent entry was posted in January this year, in which the author first cited the old Soviet slogan, Russian and Chinese are brothers, brotherhood forever, in an ironic way, and then he posted dozens of pictures on which you can see all kinds of Russian-Chinese bilingual signs, shop signs, menus, commercials, all kinds of signs in that you can see in the border area. All kinds of shops, ads. Yeah, the translation could be very funny sometimes. So I read through all the blog entries, and I found out that the recurring themes on this blog include the illegality of Chinese immigrants in Russia, both in Far East and in other regions, and construction and agricultural jobs taken by Chinese immigrants, conflicts between Chinese workers and Russian locals, also between Chinese and Russian students, and the quality problems of Chinese consumer goods and industrial products sold in Russia, and territorial and border disputes between the two countries, as well as ecological and environmental threats that China and Chinese migrants have posed to the Russian Far East. So while most of this posts from this community to different extents reflect realistic concerns of Russians about Chinese migration in the Russian Far East, some of the posts from this community are purely attacks or mockeries on Chinese people. So for instance, one entry talking about some interesting facts about China writes as follows: if you kill one Chinese in 1 second, you will have to shoot without a break for 38 years to kill all the Chinese. Another entry under the sarcastic title, unable to feed even their own people properly, cites a piece of funny news which reported a food poisoning case in St. Petersburg where 26 Chinese tourists got sick after visiting some Chinese restaurant there. So one can reasonably argue that this anti-Chinese online community represents only the concerns of a very small group of radical Russian nationalists or Russian people, and thus cannot account for the opinion of a larger population. However, the popularity of this topic was made evident by a Russian internet users' active responses to a November 2011 blog entry titled "Chinese Agarod, Chinese Garden," and this was written by a independent live journal blogger, Ilya Vadulama. So he's a pretty popular blogger in Russia. And in this blog, he documented the conditions of a Chinese garden in the Chelyabinsk Oblast with first-hand photographs and short descriptions. So let's first take a look at this blog. So photographs with short descriptions. So this is the condition of a Chinese garden, or where Chinese migrant farmers work in the Chelyabinsk Oblast, which is part of Siberia. So this oblast agricultural sector has employed approximately 2,500 Chinese workers, and the volume of the fruits produced by Chinese in the southern Ural is one of the highest in Russia. And one interesting point is that while the locals are still arguing about whether the Chinese should be allowed to work on the land, the governor of this oblast has translated his website into Chinese. Yet, as you can see in these pictures, the Chinese farmers work and live, quote unquote, in slave-like conditions. You can see this is where they live, their houses. And what makes their life even harder is the fact that very few of them can speak Russian, and they hardly interact with the locals. An especially uneasy statement for the Russian readers in this post may be that Chinese workers are doing what should have been done by local farmers, while the locals angrily look at their new neighbors but still do nothing. So this short and simple blog post received over 800 comments within only 2 days. A quick look at some of the most replied to comments will give us, I hope will give us a sense of how the Russians see this issue. Again, we see the Russians' deep concern about the possibility of Chinese taking Siberia and Far East. So some say, soon they will have bit of the floor of Siberia and the Far East thanks to the wise policy of the government. And on the other hand, we also we can hear a completely different voice. The Chinese are doing a good job. We should not buy them but learn from them. But not surprisingly, such a somewhat naive liberal view was immediately refuted. So some say, in such working conditions, they will die like flies. I am sure that they will be buried there as cattle. A Russian will never work under such conditions, even if he is a liberal pig. So some took a further step to warn others about the threats. The enemy crept up unnoticed. Enemies are everywhere. The Chinese sell vegetables that are grown with tons of pesticides and poisons, while they grow healthy vegetables in separate gardens for themselves. So, so it can be seen that while the Russian internet users hold different opinions regarding the specific measures that should be taken to tackle the problem of increasing Chinese migration into Russia, almost all of them express deep concerns and tend to see it as a threat to Russia's security and the Russian people's safety if the problem cannot be resolved. And so besides the three treaties between the Russian Empire and the Chinese Empire I mentioned earlier, Russian mistrust and hostility toward the Chinese also had roots in the Soviet period. So the Sino-Soviet split took place in 1960s, and the memories about the bloody border clashes at the end of the 1960s are still fresh to people on both sides. So I found a letter from a Soviet writer from Soviet Far East, but who spent 23 years living in China, and then he returned to the Russian Far East. So he wrote a letter to Moscow in 1969, where he said he passed on the words of a highly intelligent, honest Russian patriot as follows to Moscow. Tell the people in Moscow not to trust the Chinese in any agreement they make if it cannot be reliably backed up. In my experience, the Chinese do not abide by any agreement. And I think this statement is still relevant today, as we can see in the unproductive decade-long negotiations on the gas deal between the two energy giants and the oil pricing dispute, which broke out within less than 1 year after the Russian-Chinese oil pipeline opened in January last year. However, as the case of the Chinese Agarwat in the Chelyabinsk Oblast shows, Chinese migrant workers in Russia, legal or illegal, they will not be there in the first place if they were not really needed. Russia fears losing the Far East and Siberia, first because of its own demographic crisis and the fact that many young Russians are leaving the region now that the Soviet-era controls on population movement are absent. On the Chinese side, across the border, if you remember the first two maps, in Chinese people in the three northeastern provinces, the migration is to a great extent driven by the high unemployment rate and social tensions in that region in China, caused by massive layoffs of state-owned factories and slow economic growth in the region. So given these conditions, I really doubt that the trend of Chinese migration to Russia can be stopped in the foreseeable future. Therefore, a better question to ask may be that, will Russia and China be able to maintain a balance between the profits that both sides want to reap from this migration trend and the tensions it creates between Russian locals and Chinese migrants? So indeed, the communist-style Sino-Soviet brotherhood has long ago become obsolete, Today, one of the most frequently used descriptors of Russian-Chinese relations is strategic partnership, a diplomatic rhetoric on the state-to-state basis, which tells us nothing about what is happening on the ground. But in regard to the problems associated with Chinese migration in Russia, it is exactly what happens on the ground that calls for attention and intervention by local governments and state authorities. Efforts on both improving the legal system and promoting cultural exchanges and cross-cultural communications are imperative. So, the proposed idea of a Chinese invasion of the Russian Far East, in my view, is most likely an unrealistic story. Yet, the potential of Chinese immigrants becoming the target of Russian xenophobia is a realistic scenario, but we must put efforts to prevent this scenario to become true. Okay, thank you.